Funscale models. This series is focusing on building the Funscale Park Flyer P40C Tomahawk. In this episode, we'll be continuing construction on the wing. So we're going to prep the leading edge templates. This can be found on the template page. And what I'm going to do is I've cut this extra over here. I'm going to use that to fold the parts and templates onto themselves. Just using some glue stick here. And I'll fold it one more time over. And this is just to make it a heavier stock paper, less likely to bend when we're holding this up to the wing structure itself. Alright, we'll cut those out in just a little bit here. While we're waiting for that to dry, let's go ahead and prep our leading edge. So you can see here from this angle, we have a little bit of extra on the top here, which is not a big deal. But we also want to prep the leading edge to the correct shape. So to help protect the ribs while we're using our block plane here, we're going to use masking tape. Just like we did with the hatch rails on the fuselage. I'm setting it just behind that 1/4 inch leading edge. So you can see a little bit better here that we've got this amount to trim. So with our wing prepared, what I've done is I've laid down a bit of a blanket here because you're going to have a lot of shavings and it just makes it easier for cleanup. And looking at this here, I do have a pretty good amount on this end to remove first, not as much here. So I'm going to start shaving at this end. Having that little bit of overhang down here does help. And what I'm basically doing is I'm beveling down the leading edge to be sort of a straight line. This was your flat line right there, straight out. We'll add the curve in just a little while. Getting close on this end. Starting to pull up that tape, which means we're right there. So we can go ahead and just fine tune it at this point. We still have some more room down here though. As you can see, there's a bit of a lip there. So let's go ahead and work on that. Okay, so we're getting close. Just kind of keep checking it every couple of swipes at this point. Down the edge there. See the angle. I'm going to leave it at this point and we'll work next on rounding the leading edge. So and this is more just to knock down some of the higher points. Now where I'm not wanting to do the undersurface just yet, I'm going to start working the top surface. So I've got my multi-grit sanding block here. I'm sanding down, hard to tell in the with the camera, but you can see it's just starting to shave the masking tape. And that's what we want. We want to get a nice smooth transition from the leading edge into those ribs. I'm going to go to the little bit lighter. And having a bigger block also helps you from digging in, so when you're sanding. So if you're using a smaller block like this, you have the opportunity to do something like that, and that can damage your rib. So it's a little bit better to use a larger block that spans across a couple of ribs. Go ahead and take a look at that. It's looking pretty good so far. And then I can fine-tune it more with a smaller block. I'm just looking down the edge just to make sure I'm not putting any sort of bow or anything unintended into that leading edge. Pretty good. I'll go ahead and I'll pause here and we'll tape the underside and start trimming that. So I've taped the underside just like the top. Looking at it from this angle, you can see we have a little bit more to take off on this end and very little at this end. So I'll go ahead and, just like how we did with the top half, start at one end and start working my way down. And again, what I'm looking to do is if this line went straight across, that's what I'm knocking it down to. I'm not going to do so much of this angle. It's going to be more parallel with this section of the rib. All right, I'm starting to pull up on that end already, so I'm going to be careful as I work my way down. Getting close. So now that I'm just about there, I can go ahead and start just roughing out the leading edge with a couple of passes. And you can see it already starting to look like a leading edge shape. I've got a little bit more to do, so I'm going to block sand this section. So you can see here again, that's starting to sand the actual paper, so we're right in the right spot we want to be. I'm going to stop now, and I'm going to cut out my leading edge templates. So I've cut them out to rough shape, and now it's time to actually cut the airfoil to it. I'm using a small scissors to do the cutting. So this is the wing leading edge guide number 7. So looking at our ribs here, that's this one on the very tip. So we're pretty close. We just need to remove some of the sharpness of this edge. This is number 4, which is this one here. Also very close, we just need to move this bottom edge. So we'll focus on that and sand that to shape. Let's look at 7 here. This is 4. Pretty close. This is 1. Close, but we need to do some more work on that one. And here's our tip. Pretty good. So just again, taking our time, working down leading edge. It's critical to get this right. This is what makes the airplane fly. If you don't have a good leading edge, it's not going to fly very well. Okay. So I'm at the point now where I can go ahead and remove the tape. And we can sort of blend these in better. You can see that's blended in quite nicely. So I'm going to use a sanding pad. This is a fine grit one to kind of help smooth out the leading edge and blend it in more. And you can see here some of the etching is coming off. That lets you know that you're hitting that surface. But I haven't done much there because this is above it, so I need to continue to lightly sand that. I think I'm going to use a block on this though. So we've got our wingtip here, and looking at the plans, it's a nice gentle curve. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut it like that. And first shape the. And you'll want to reference the plans while you do this, and then blend it into the wingtip. And this is why it's important to have pinned this to keep this from moving, so you can make sure that you've got it in alignment when you're doing this final sanding. I think that looks pretty good. Alright, so there'll be a little bit more fine sanding before we're ready to cover the model, but this gives us a good stopping point for this section. With the primary sanding done, we can go ahead and separate the aileron here from the rest of the wing. It's a pretty straightforward process through cutting through TE2 in this section and this section. We'll go ahead and remove the pins, and then we can sand up the surfaces. We'll go ahead and we'll clean up the outside surfaces with a sanding block. I've cleaned up the edges here. I've got to do this edge here. Again, just lightly sand it. One thing that's different about this model is the rear spar here is 2 stringers, top and bottom, number 4. There's a space between the 2 stringers here we need to infill with scrap balsa. So I've got some 3/32 sheet here that's scrap, and I'll go ahead and I'll just sort of mark this to go ahead and start infilling this section. So we've infilled our areas here. Give it just a light sanding to make sure everything's nice and smooth. And now we'll pay attention to the aileron. One of the next steps is to hinge and shape the leading edge of the aileron. So looking at our plans as a reference, we can see that on the model here, the control horn is here on the servo, and it comes out to about right here for the actual control horn and linkage. So we'll only need about 2 hinges for this size of an aileron. So we'll put one about right there, and we'll put another one about right here. That gives a nice distance between them, as well as not interfering where our control horn will go. So we'll go ahead and we'll mark that first here on the aileron. So we'll want to put one about right here and one about right here. So knowing that that's our spot, we're going to look for about the halfway point of each one of those locations. I'm just sort of eyeballing it here, and then I'll go ahead and draw a line in there. Previously, when we did the tail section, we had some extra control horn here, so I will cut some hinges free. And then again, we're carefully cutting I want to be 90 with the flat surface here. And we'll make sure we're 90. And this is a much easier cut through. Mark the width points. Again, make sure we reference. Okay, that'll be good for the inside one. And then we'll line this up so that it's centered between the 2 ribs here, and then mark our location of where these will go. And then transfer that onto here. And then again, cutting in the center of the surface. Hinges in. And looking at that, got that pretty well centered. So we'll go ahead and we'll round the leading edge of the aileron and then check the fit again. So we've completed hinging our aileron. The leading edge has been contoured, and this will allow for quite a bit of deflection, more than will be needed on the model. So looking at the aileron here, you can see its underside is sheet balsa wood. A lot of these smaller models, you want to be conscious of weight and save it wherever you can. So the suggestion sometimes comes up by adding lightning holes to the model. You can cut out sections here if you want by hand, or you can use a tool and cut them out. I'm not going to do that on this model. I don't think that the weight saved is going to be significant. And when you're doing lightning holes, you also have to take in consideration, am I really lightening it up to the point where it's going to be a benefit versus weakening the structure? And if you do have a sort of rough landing, or perhaps cartwheel the model, is it going to be tearing itself apart because you've removed so much structure, or will it survive the incident? But I do want to show how I do different sized lightning holes. So mentioned before, you can use a circular file. I think that works really well if you're using just a small hole, like if you want to make a lead for a wire or something like that. So you can get a small hole, and of course you can go up to the diameter of the actual file itself. The other thing you can do is to use brass tubing, and you can sharpen the end of it. It's sort of kind of difficult to see in the light there, and use that to actually cut the balsa. And I do use these quite a bit actually, in different size tubes. So here I've got an aluminum tube that you sharpen the inside of the edge. But one of the things I don't often see is how do you sharpen that inside of the edge, and how often do you need to sharpen it? So what I use to sharpen mine is an old X-Acto blade. Here you can even see that maybe there's some paint on it and the tip has chipped off. And what you're going to do is carefully shave the inside. You can see some shavings of aluminum. Aluminum, of course, is a little bit softer metal, so that works easier. But it creates a nice sharp tip. And then you simply just put the tube on where you want and slowly turn. And it doesn't take long. Of course, this is only 1/16, but it cuts a nice circle for you. And again, if you want to use something in a larger diameter, same thing, you just would make sure you're sharpening it. And I do this about every couple of uses. It just makes things cut through a little bit better. And you want to be careful of those filings and properly dispose of them. But sort of the same thing. And I press down just a little bit to sort of create, you can see where it created a crease there, and that helps when you rotate it cut the wood. And I'm just applying a little bit of pressure here and just sort of working my way around. And you can see it cuts it out real nicely. And again, if you need to cut circles, this is a nice way to cut a small circle on some wood. So if you wanted to, you could certainly use maybe even this larger tool in these sections here to open it up. I don't think it's needed, but that does be an option for you. And I've also made some small tools over time to get into tight spaces. This is the same aluminum tubes, just smaller sections cut free. So here we have the center section and the outer right panel framed up and completed. Most of the work is done on these before we're ready to start joining the two together. As you can see here, that's why we angled this rib so that we have the dihedral that's for the model. One thing that I did a little bit different about the leading edge on this is I only did the top half. I'm leaving this bottom half for now, and I'll adjust that later as I get closer to covering the model. I'll go ahead and build the other panel just the same as this one, and I'll show you how we join them together.